The flames were visible from miles away, a single drone strike. And just like that, Israel's most critical refinery was gone. But here's what most people missed. This wasn't just an attack on one country. This was a carefully calculated message sent to every boardroom, every energy market, and every government on the planet. Because when refineries don't just burn, they collapse supply chains, and the question nobody wants to answer is, who's next? Where we don't just cover the headlines, we cover what the headlines actually cost you. Today we're breaking down one of the most significant shifts in modern conflict. The moment energy infrastructure stopped being off-limits and became the weapon itself. Stay with us, because by the end of this, you'll understand why a fire in Haifa has consequences reaching all the way to your fuel pump, your grocery bill, and your business's bottom line. It began as an ordinary morning. Workers arrived at their stations, machinery hummed, fuel moved through pipelines the way it had for decades. Israel's largest refinery, one of the most strategically critical industrial facilities in the entire Middle East, was operating as normal. Then, everything changed. A swarm of drones appeared without warning. They moved fast, with precision, and within minutes, they found their target. The Haifa Refinery, responsible for processing a significant portion of Israel's fuel supply, was struck hard. Massive explosions followed. Thick black smoke climbed high into the sky, visible for miles. Emergency crews scrambled. Sirens echoed across the city. Residents near the complex were told to stay indoors as toxic fumes spread through the air. By the time the fires were partially contained, the damage was done. And the world was watching. Iranian officials did not immediately claim full responsibility, but analysts were clear. The strike bore every hallmark of a calculated state-level operation. The drones were sophisticated. The target was not random. Haifa's refinery isn't simply an industrial site. It supplies refined fuel to military operations, commercial transport, and civilian infrastructure across Israel. Hitting it wasn't random aggression. It was a deliberate economic statement. And that statement was received loud and clear. To understand why this strike carries such weight, you need to look at what came before it. In the days prior, US and Israeli forces had reportedly carried out a series of strikes on Iranian energy depots and infrastructure tied to Iran's military supply chain. These were not minor operations. They were designed to weaken Iran's economic backbone and reduce its capacity to fund and sustain military activity across the region. Iran watched. Iran calculated. And then Iran responded. But instead of targeting a military base, instead of hitting soldiers or weapon storage, Iran chose something far more dangerous. They chose to strike at the economy. The message was unmistakable. If you hit our energy, we will hit yours. This was a shift analysts had been warning about for months, and now it had arrived. The choice of Haifa was not accidental. Modern warfare is no longer fought solely on battlefields. It is fought in energy markets, in boardrooms, and in the risk calculations of investors and institutions who move enormous sums of capital based on stability. By targeting a civilian and commercial refinery, Iran demonstrated a willingness to raise the stakes far beyond conventional military exchange. It wasn't just an attack. It was a signal. An extraordinarily expensive, extraordinarily dangerous signal. There's an old saying among economists and military strategists alike. The most powerful weapon in the modern world isn't a missile. It's a pipeline. For decades, this remained largely theoretical. Nations studied it, war-gamed it in classified briefings, wrote about it in academic papers, but very few believed they'd see it play out in real time, at this scale, with these consequences. They were wrong. To understand how dangerous this moment truly is, look back to 1973. Arab oil-producing nations imposed an embargo on countries that had supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War. They didn't fire a single missile at New York or London. They simply turned off the oil. Within months, the United States was in economic chaos. Fuel queues stretched around city blocks. Inflation surged. Entire industries were brought to their knees, not by bombs, but by the absence of energy. That embargo lasted less than a year, and it nearly broke the Western economy. What is unfolding today has the potential to be far worse, because this time, it isn't an embargo. It is direct physical destruction. Refineries aren't being switched off. They're being blown apart. And refineries take years to rebuild. There is a moment in every major crisis when financial markets stop speculating and start bleeding. That moment has arrived. Oil prices jumped within hours of the Haifa strike. Traders who had already been tracking the escalating tensions moved quickly. Positions adjusted, hedges placed, futures repriced. But this wasn't panic. It was calculation. Professional traders understand something casual observers often miss. Oil prices don't just respond to current supply disruptions. They respond to perceived future risk. And the moment a major refinery is destroyed in a conflict zone, markets begin pricing in the possibility of more strikes, more disruption, more uncertainty. Beyond oil, the shipping industry is facing its own quiet crisis. The waterways surrounding the Middle East carry some of the most strategically vital cargo on the planet. Insurance premiums for vessels in the region were already climbing. After Haifa, they jumped again. Some shipping companies rerouted entirely, adding days and considerable cost to journeys that would normally pass straight through. Others reduced shipment sizes to limit exposure. A small number suspended operations in certain corridors altogether. Each of these decisions, made quietly in boardrooms far from the conflict, adds cost. That cost moves through supply chains, it reaches manufacturers, it reaches retailers, and eventually, it reaches the consumer in the form of higher prices for goods they buy every single day. Airlines are watching closely. Jet fuel is directly tied to refining capacity and oil markets, and sustained disruption pushes operating costs higher for every carrier on the planet. Costs that translate directly into higher ticket prices. Chemical manufacturers, agricultural supply chains, logistics networks. All of them connected, all of them exposed. The bleed has already begun, and the wound is far from closed. History has a pattern that most people only recognize when it's too late. Every major economic crisis, every collapse that reshaped industries and altered the daily lives of ordinary people, began with a moment that felt manageable. A moment where leaders on all sides believed the situation was still under control. That assumption has been wrong before. It may be wrong again. If the strikes continue, if refineries keep burning, if diplomatic efforts continue to stall, analysts project consequences unfolding in distinct and increasingly severe stages. First, oil prices continue climbing, not gradually, but in sharp, volatile movements driven by each new development. Investment in energy-dependent industries slows sharply. Second, the pressure shifts from markets to governments. Nations across Europe, Asia, and Africa heavily reliant on Middle Eastern energy begin making emergency decisions. Strategic reserves are tapped. Supply agreements are negotiated at premium prices. Fiscal plans built around stable energy costs suddenly face serious strain. Third, the economic pain becomes political. Populations facing rising fuel costs and slowing economic activity demand action from their governments. That pressure pushes leaders toward harder positions, reducing the already limited space for diplomatic compromise. This is how regional conflicts become global crises, not through a single dramatic moment, but through a slow, grinding accumulation of economic pressure that eventually becomes politically unsustainable. The Haifa Refinery fire will eventually be extinguished. The smoke will clear. The immediate images of destruction will fade from the news cycle, but the consequences will not fade with them. The world has crossed a threshold. Energy infrastructure, the invisible foundation upon which modern civilization is built, has been established as a legitimate weapon of conflict. That knowledge doesn't disappear when this particular crisis ends. It carries forward. It reshapes how future conflicts are planned and executed. It permanently alters the risk calculations of every nation, every corporation, and every investor with exposure to global energy markets. The question is no longer whether the world will pay a price for what happened at Haifa. The question is simply, how high will that price go? If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what's actually at stake, share it with someone who needs to see it. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because the stories that shape your money and your future, we cover them here every single time.